Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture what we will do is that we are going to learn how to create the database which is going to store the values of our task in the backend. So we will learn how to create database by using the SQLite helper which we have discussed in the intro lecture. So as I earlier mentioned, SQLite database actually have a different class which is called as the SQLite helper, and in accurate terms it's actually called as the SQLite open helper. So this is essentially a class which helps us to create the database and manage the database so that we could add data and remove data or read data from it. So without wasting any time, the first thing which you need to do is that you need to create a brand new class. So just go to this folder right here, right click on it and create a Java class, and let's name this class as my let's say database helper. So this is the custom class which we are creating, and this is not actually the original database helper class, but we are going to learn how to use that once we have created this class. So simply name this class as my database helper and click OK. And in order to use the SQLite open helper, what we are going to do is that we are going to make this class extend the SQLite open helper so that this class can actually inherit the methods of the SQLite open helper class. So we type extends the SQLite open helper. So this basically allows us to implement methods from it. So if you go over here, as you could see, there is an option which says implement method. So simply click that option, and these are the two methods which we are going to implement from that particular class. So these two methods are the onCreate method and the onUpgrade method. So let's basically go ahead and hit OK to import these two methods in our main class. And as you could see, now we have these two methods over here, and still we are having an error. And let's see why this error actually is. So it basically says that you need to create a constructor matching super. So simply select this option, and here what we are going to do is that we are going to create a constructor. So simply hit OK, and as you could see, now the constructor has been created for us. So now let's go ahead and understand the significance of these things which we have over here. So actually we have implemented two methods. The first method is the onCreate method. So what this onCreate method actually does is that it contains the code which is going to be executed while creating the database. So all the database creation code is actually going to contain in the onCreate method. Then we have the onUpgrade method, and the need of this particular method arises when you actually want to upgrade your database. So let's say you have the version 1 database of your application which is having quite a different bit of data, and now what you need to do is that let's say you want to migrate or modify your database. So in that case, when you wish to upgrade your database, the code written inside the onUpgrade method actually gets executed. So now let's go ahead and start creating the database. So even before you create a database, what you need to do is that you need to define a few things about the database, such as the database version, the database name, the tables in your database, the column ID, and the task name. So let's first go ahead and create the first property, which is basically the database version. So we will go right here, and then we will type in private static final int, and let's declare a variable which is called as database version. So we will type database underscore version, and let's say the database version is equal to 1. So now what happens is that the by default database version gets assigned as 1, and whenever we basically change this version to a number higher than the previous version, so what that basically does is that it's going to execute the code written inside the onUpgrade method. So once we have defined the version, you also need to define the database name. So we type in private static final string and the database name. So we will type in database underscore name equals, and let's say the database name is going to be tasks.db. And the next thing which you need to do is that you need to define the table name in that database. So if you are already familiar with databases like SQL database, MySQL database, then you know that how a database is actually structured. So basically you have a huge database having a database name, and within that database you basically have different types of tables, and the data is stored in a tabular format in terms of rows and columns of that particular table. So if you already know about this, then it's absolutely fine, but if you don't have information about what are databases and how information is stored in a tabular format in the database, then you could do a quick Google search and you will be able to clear your concepts within a few minutes. And let me make a modification over here. This is going to be tasks.db, not comma. Okay, so now let's go ahead and define the table name. So what we will do is that we will type in public. This is going to be static final string and the table name. So we will type in table tasks equals, and this is going to be named as tasks. And the next thing which we do is that we define the column ID, which is basically the property of your task. So we are basically going to have an ID and a task name. So let's define the first property by typing public static final string, and this is going to be column underscore ID, and let's say this ID is going to be underscore ID, and then we will define the task name. So we will type in public static final string column underscore task name, and the task name is going to be, let's say, task name itself. Okay, so once this thing is done, we are basically good to go. So now the next thing which you need to do is that you need to make modifications to this constructor as well. So what we will do here is that we will go ahead and replace this name with the database name, and we need to replace the version with the database version as well. So once this thing is done, we are basically good to go. Now once we have defined the attributes of the table as well as the database, the next thing which you need to do is always you need to create the database tables first. So for that, what we need to do is that we need to write in a SQL query. So we will go inside the onCreate method, because obviously onCreate method is going to be the method which is going to be executed first. And in this method, let's create a query by typing string query equals, and let's say this query says create table. So this is basically the SQL query. So make sure that you write these queries with extreme care, because even if you are incorrect by a single space, then your queries are not going to execute properly. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to type in the code, and I'm going to provide you with the source code as well, so that you don't make any mistakes while writing these SQL queries. So we will type in create table. So it's actually a query for creating tables, and we want to name this table as table tasks. So we will type in table tasks, give a plus sign, and we will have a bracket over here, and we need to create a table with a column ID which is specified over here. So we'll specify the column ID plus, and we do need to have the primary key with the auto increment facility. So we will type in integer primary key and auto increment. So if you already know SQL, then you would be quite familiar with these terms. So this is basically the primary key, and for those of you who don't know what a primary key is, it's basically a key which is used to identify your table entries uniquely. So that means a unique ID is being assigned to each and every task in your database. Okay, after this, what we will do is that we will also define the column name. So we will again give a plus sign, type in column task name, give a plus sign, again type in text, make sure to have sufficient space in between, plus, and then we finally end the query with a bracket and a semicolon, and also make sure to have a semicolon at the end. So this thing is actually quite confusing for beginners, so I will provide you the source code and you don't actually need to worry about it. Okay, so once we have this query set up, the next thing which you need to do is that you basically need to execute this query. So what we will do is that we will type in db.execute SQL and we will pass in the query over here. So this is actually going to go ahead and execute the query for us. So once this query is executed, the next thing which we need to do is that we need to define the other methods as well. That is, this method was basically to just go ahead and create the table. So once you have the table, now you could go ahead and add task to the table or remove tasks from that particular table. So what we will do here is that we will define two methods, which is the add task and remove task methods. So now let's go ahead and define the methods for adding the task and removing the tasks as well. So what we will do is that we will go right here and type in public void, and let's name this method as add tasks, and it's actually going to accept the task. So we are going to pass in tasks over here. So this is going to be tasks, and what we will do here is that we will go ahead and make a provision so that we could actually go ahead and insert those tasks. So the first thing which we need to do is that we need to get the values in the content values and then add them up in the database. So what we will do is that we will create a content values object, and we are going to attach the values which we want to insert to that particular content values object, and then we will basically go ahead and add that content values object to the database which we have. So what we will do is that we will first create the content values object. So we'll type in content values, and let's name this thing as values. So content values is nothing but it basically is kind of like a data structure which allows you to attach values. So this is going to be equal to new content values, and we type in values dot put, and into this we put in the values as the column task name, which is the task name, and then the actual task which we are going to get is by typing in tasks dot get task name. So if you recall this get task name method which we have in the task class right over here, that basically is going to give you out the actual task from the task which we have over here. So once we have this, the next thing which we do is that we create the object of the database as well. So once we have these values, we need to put it into the database. So in order to put these values in the database, we also need the object of the database class. So what we will do is that we will create the database class by typing sqlite database db equals, and we get the writable database by using a method which is get writable database. So once we have this database, we basically need to insert this value which we have right now into the database. So we type db, which is the database object, dot insert, and then we basically need to mention the table in which these tasks needs to be inserted. So these tasks needs to be inserted into the table task. So we will type in table task, give the next parameter as null, and the final thing which you need to do is that you need to use this content values object to be passed over here, which is actually going to have your task names. So what this line of code essentially does that in the database, it inserts the values in the table which is named as table tasks. So this is actually the meaning of this line. And once the values are inserted, what you need to take care is that you need to close the database. So you type in db.close, and that's actually going to close your entire database. So once this thing is done, we are done adding the task to the database. Now the next thing which you need to do is that you also need to have the code which is going to basically remove the task from the database. So we are going to create a new method by typing public void remove tasks, and it's actually going to accept a value which is basically task name. So once we give the task name value to this particular method, what this method is going to do is that it's going to remove that particular task from the database. So the first thing which we need to do here is that we need to get a reference to the database as we get right over here. So what we do is that we type in sqlite database db in order to create the object of the database, and use the get writable database method to actually get the database. And once we have the database, now you could go ahead and execute any query onto this particular database. So what we essentially want to do here is that we want to delete the particular task name from the database. So we type db.execsql, which is basically execute the SQL query. And in here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to type in the SQL query for deleting a particular task from the task name. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to pause this video. I'm going to type in the query because the query is a little bit confusing and I might make any mistake while typing in the query. So let me just go ahead and write in the query and I'll be back soon. Okay, so I've successfully added the query and this is what the query actually looks like. So it says delete from, that is you need to delete from the table which is named as table task, where the column task name is equal to this particular task name which we have passed over here. So whatever task name you are going to pass it to this particular query, it's actually going to delete that particular task name. So as you could see, the query is quite complex to write and you might make some mistakes along the way. So it's actually better if you copy the code rather than typing it by yourself. So okay, so once this thing is actually done, the next thing which we need to do is that we also need to write in a special method which is actually going to go ahead and is going to read the data from that particular database. But I guess if I add it to this particular video, this video would be quite long. So in the next lecture, what we will do is that we will learn how to basically go ahead and read the contents of the database. So thank you very much for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.